Welcome back to Horrifying Stories. Countless real-life stories have been told about near-death experiences, but for someone to be pronounced dead twice on the slopes of Mount Everest, then a day later, appearing back at base camp is a totally different story. This is Beck Weathers' Horrifying Story. Viewer discretion is advised. In the treacherous realm of the mighty Himalayas, nestled amidst the awe-inspiring peaks is Mount Everest. It is the world's tallest mountain, with a total elevation of 8,849 meters above sea level, that many daring mountaineers and adventurers seek to conquer at least once in their lifetime. One of them was Beck Weathers. 49-year-old Beck Weathers has conquered quite a number of peaks already, making him one of the more experienced climbers in the group of the 1996 expedition organized by Rob Hall. Rob, a mountaineer from New Zealand, first climbed the Earth's tallest peak in 1990. 7 months later, Rob Hall and his climbing buddy Gary Ball had already conquered the highest peaks of every other continent, among the fastest periods to ever conquer the so-called 7 summits. Since then, they've organized commercial expeditions to Everest and a couple other summits. In 1993, he lost his buddy Gary to a certain type of altitude sickness in one of their climbs to another mountain. Yet in spite of the tragedy, Rob continued what he and Gary started. He resumed guiding expeditions to Everest in 1994. Rob was strict when it came to safety. He always had this time limit set for a safe descent. In fact, in 1995, he had a group turn around despite already reaching the south summit, close to the actual summit, due to shortage of time and extreme snow. Hearing of Rob Hall's reputation, this urged Beck to join and spend $65,000 just to be part of this expedition, clearly something that he was very determined to do. To him, conquering Everest was not just something he wanted to do but rather something he badly needed as he battled with depression. Despite the outward success he obviously had, a successful career as a pathologist in Texas, a 20-year marriage to his wife Peach and an intact family, he has always felt alone. His mental condition was severe to the point that he had suicidal tendencies. He struggled with it greatly, and in his attempts to fight it, he realized that the only effective distraction was when he pushed his body to its limits. It is only when he challenges himself on such extreme activities that he forgets life's problems and struggles. Now, right before he ventured into this expedition to the world's tallest peak, Beck underwent a surgery called radial keratotomy. This involved micro-incisions to his corneas and was intended to rectify his short-sightedness. After the medical procedure, he was now set to depart for Nepal. It was spring of 1996. Led by Rob Hall and together with his fellow climbers, they embarked on the arduous journey up Everest's treacherous slopes. By May 10, 1996, they were already in their high camp at South Col, ready to take on their last stretch to the summit. Getting there would roughly take between 12 to 14 hours, but the weather was clear and everyone had their eyes on the prize. As they climbed higher and higher, it was then that Beck started sensing problems with his recently corrected eyes. His corneas started to gradually change shape at the height that they were going and left Beck partially blind in the dark. This slowed him down, but he never gave up. Going further slowly but surely, he eventually realized that the bright rays of the sun would trigger his iris to close by reflex, thereby protecting his retina and naturally finding a way around his cornea problem. This continued to support his sense of depth. However, as he tried to wipe his misty eyes with his fingers, he accidentally scratched an ice crystal onto his right eye. His left eye was spared, but Beck lost his visual sense of depth, making it extremely dangerous in such a terrain. Thus, Rob decided Beck should not go any further due to his condition. It was still around 7:30 in the morning. Rob instructed Beck to stay put and wait for him to come back. Beck promised and stuck to it. Apparently, it was Rob who broke his promise. He never came back. As the rest of the climbers ventured higher with Rob to the summit, a storm ensued quickly and overtook them. Rob got stranded just below the summit with another climber, Doug Hansen, who was also part of the expedition a year prior. Many believe that the previous expedition that failed to reach the summit in 1995 clouded Rob's decisions that year and prompted him to disregard the time limit set. He allowed Doug to push through to the summit, but by the time they started to descend, Doug was already too weak. Other climbers have already told Rob to leave Doug and continue moving down, but he dismissed them and still stayed with Doug in the midst of the storm. Sadly, Rob passed away that evening. Meanwhile, Beck continued to wait for Rob despite having been invited by other climbers to start making their descent. Around 5 in the afternoon, almost 10 hours since Rob left him, Beck began to worry about Rob. About the same time, John Krakauer, another climber, descended and told Beck of Rob's decision to stay with Doug. John offered to assist Beck with the descent, but Beck decided to wait for Mike Groom, Rob's co-guide in the expedition, before beginning his descent. Mike helped Beck crawl back to South Col as they descended with a small group of climbers. During that night, the storm intensified and everything around them was just all white, as if getting lost inside a bottle of milk. Confused and disoriented as they were trying to search for their tents at the camp, the group of climbers almost fell off the edge of the mountain. Beck lost his right glove, causing his hand to freeze in the midst of all that chaos and confusion. Now overcome with exhaustion, they were forced to camp out in the open that night. Just when Beck thought he'd got it all figured out, the strong wind threw him to the ground. His oxygen levels were now too low and he's suffering from extreme hypothermia. He was now on the brink of death. Help finally arrived that same night. Russian guide Anatoly Bukrev rescued the climbers, but as he checked on Beck, lying unconscious and frozen, he deemed he was already dead. The following morning, Canadian Dr. Stuart Hutchinson along with 3 Sherpas came to look for Beck and Yasuko Namba, a Japanese woman who was also left behind during the initial rescue the night prior. He first checked on Yasuko, whose skin was already porcelain white and her eyes dilated. There was nothing that could be done for her. He then shifted his attention to Beck, who was already partially buried in snow. His right arm was completely frozen and ice had already formed around his face. As Dr. Stewart would put it, Beck was so close to death yet still breathing and knew that in that condition, there was no chance of survival. Thus, he left Beck and went back to camp, pronouncing him dead. Reports already included Beck in the list of casualties, and Peach, his wife, had been informed of her husband's untimely demise. However, in a miraculous turn of events around 4 that afternoon, he woke up as if from a dream and as if he was sleeping comfortably on his bed, still unable to figure out where he was or what happened to him. His frozen arm caught his attention and hit it on the ground. It was only upon hearing the woody sound that his arm made upon hitting the ground did he come to his senses. Adrenaline started to kick in and he knew that if he didn't push himself to stand up, he'd definitely be dead in no time. So Beck gathered himself together, got up and slowly made his way back to camp in spite of his feet being all numb and frozen. To the shock of other climbers and rescuers, Beck managed to reach the low-level camp. Beck Weathers appeared with his face darkened due to frostbite and limbs that may never be restored to its normal state. Still, he managed to move and talk, thankful to be alive. He believes he is most likely the first person to ever wake up from a hypothermic coma. Against all odds, Beck survived the harrowing ordeal. Tragically, however, the mountain claimed the lives of several of his companions, 8 climbers in all. Their dreams are forever lost to the unforgiving heights. Despite these, Beck's survival was not without a price. Severe frostbite had ravaged his hands and face, necessitating multiple surgeries and amputation, including his nose. Thankfully, skillful surgeons were able to use skin obtained from his neck and ear to reconstruct his nose and his forehead. The physical scars he bore were a constant reminder of the immense challenges he had overcome. Because of his experience, Beck Weathers became a symbol of resilience and human spirit. His story shed light on the inherent risks and uncertainties of mountaineering, and the fine line that separates triumph from tragedy on the world's tallest peak. Over the years since then, Beck has dedicated himself to sharing his experience and advocating for safety in mountaineering. But more than his experience at the mountain, he lives to tell of the danger such obsession to the sport actually holds. At some point in his life, climbing became his primary focus and greatest distraction that everything else went secondary, including his marriage and his family. In fact, Peach was on the brink of filing for a divorce as soon as Beck came back from the expedition. After the horrifying incident, she decided to stay at his side and took care of him, eventually leading to a saved marriage. For the first time, Beck finally found peace despite the injuries he got from the ordeal. Ironically, he feels most at ease now with his own body than he ever did before the accident. His story stands as a stark reminder that even the mightiest of mountains can humble the proudest of adventurers. Thank you for making it this far. If you liked this video, click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Let us know what you think about this story. We would love to hear from you. Again, thank you, and see you on the next one.